Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas, on Thursday, September the 12th, and welcome to our commentary. You know, I'll talk about Charlie Kirk in a second. That, of course, is just less than a day old, and I'll talk about that in a second. But I think this week, I think many of us thought that we would be spending today, um, September 11th, remembering. September 11th. And we're going to do that because I have a lot of memories of that day. And we'll talk about Charlie Kirk in a couple of minutes because I have some thoughts on that as well. But this is the 24th anniversary of September 11th. I'm sure most of you realize that. 24 years have gone by since that fateful day. And sometimes I cannot believe how fast time has flown. So I'm sure some of you have a similar reaction. You know, where did 24 years go? Um, September 11th, at this time, or mid afternoon, I remember I was in my office and, we were all watching TV. I remember we were sitting there literally watching the towers come down. I think that happened late morning. But it's one of those days that you always remember exactly what you were doing. And for this generation, that's probably one of those days. I remember I was jogging at the time, so I went out for my jog early in the morning, came back, had taken a shower, was literally fixing my tie, and I had this little TV in my bedroom, or our bedroom, I should say. And it was a little tiny TV that was connected or I was watching Bloomberg. They had Bloomberg News, the business channel. And one of the habits I had early in the morning before I went to the office was to check and see what the business channel was saying, what the news were coming from around the world, and some of the projected, Dow Jones and stuff like that for the days. I was kind of would always do that. I would always keep an eye on that channel. I don't think that. Well, I think that channel still exists, but I don't think it's free. It was free back then, but I don't think it's free anymore. So anyway, I'm sitting there putting my tie on, and I've got my eye on the TV, and I was going to go over and eat breakfast in a minute, and I noticed that one of the towers was, there was smoke coming out of one of the towers, and they had that on the screen. And they were talking about an airplane crashing into the tower. Now, for me, that brought back an immediate memory. And that was because years ago, I remember reading a story about a 747 that was flying from Argentina to New York City. And as the 747 was coming into, I guess, JFK to land, there was a problem. The pilot made a mistake and he was going to hit the towers. It was never a threatening thing because the tower got a hold of the pilot and told him, change directions, and he did. So there was never any realistic threat of the 747 crashing into the towers. But for some reason, it brought back that memory, and I said to myself, "Gee, I wonder what unlucky pilot or terrible luck of this plane to be crashing into the World Center towers." And because I had been in those towers a few years before. I had made a business trip one time and was in one of the towers. I don't remember which one. And went up to, I don't know, like the 70th floor or something. And I remember from up there looking at New York, it was a pretty stunning view. But anyway, so that's what I was thinking about, saying to myself, gee, what unlucky airplane or pilot made that mistake. And then I see the other plane hitting the tower, literally on TV, the other plane hitting the tower. And of course, at that moment, I realized that this was not an accident, that this was something bigger than that. And then, of course, the events began to unfold. I went to the office in the next half hour or so. When I got to the office, I spoke with my wife, and she said that they had gone to she had gone to drop off the kids at school, but I guess they were letting the kids out early. So she went to pick them up, the younger ones. And so they went home, and I was glad to see that they were home because frankly, I I had fears that there might be other incidents like that in the area because we have a nuclear power station around here. We have obviously high-rise buildings as well here in the Dallas area, and then we hear about the Pentagon, the plane in the Pentagon, and then of course not much later we heard about the plane crashing in Pennsylvania and the whole story behind those heroes on the plane. So it's hard to forget these days, and it's hard to forget how you felt that day. I mean, I literally thought that there were going to be other attacks. I think most people did too. I think most people thought that there were going to be other attacks. I know that they immediately shut down airports and they shut down tunnels and stuff like that. So it was really a remarkable day to remember how it all happened and how I think we ended up much better than we could have, that it would have been. I was expecting a lot more airplanes. I was expecting a lot more problems. I think, in retrospect, looking back at it now, I think President Bush and his administration did a great job in setting up the system to defend the country and going after some of these terrorist organizations. And I thought they did a fabulous job, and we owe him and his administration a lot of gratitude, a lot of thanks for the great work that they did, the Bush administration back in 9/11. So even though it's 24 years, it doesn't seem that far away because this is one of those days that you remember. And I remember somebody saying to me that for my generation, that September 11th was a lot maybe like December 7th for a previous generation, Pearl Harbor Day. And a lot of people remember where they were in Pearl Harbor Day, where they got the news and all of that. And I think to some extent that's true. I think we remember this day in a very special way. I just have a hard time believing that it was 24 years ago. That's the only thing that I find shocking. 24 years ago. That's a long time, but it did happen 24 years ago. So again, our thanks to all the heroes, our gratitude to all of those firemen and policemen who went into those buildings. They're absolute heroes, all of them. And we were lucky, I think, to have the leadership in President Bush that we had that day. Very fortunate that he was in the White House and that team that he had was able to put together a response to 9/11. So we remember 9/11, even though it's 24 years later, we remember 9/11. And this morning, President Trump was in, I don't know where he was, whether it was the Pentagon or New York City, but they were, reading the names of the people, and it really hits you just how many people there were, because that reading goes on for a long time. So it really hits you all of a sudden how many people were killed that day. I think it's close to 3,000 names of people who were killed that day. And of course, we always remember the heroes in that Flight 93, I think it was, the people who literally tried to take over that plane, and unfortunately, the plane crashed. So lots of memories on this September the 11th. Well, speaking of Charlie Kirk, look, there's not much more that one can say about the insanity of this action. And I think that, and I've said it before, that we need to lower the volume a little bit in our politics. I've said it many times. It's not just now. And yes, both sides need to lower the volume. I've never said otherwise. And but I have noticed something about our politics, and I detect this very often when I get invited on Univision or Telemundo or something like that, that our politics has been getting a lot more harsh. And the things that people are saying to each other when you read it on the internet particularly is really very harsh. And we're an angry nation. And I think, both sides are at fault here. But the stuff that we're hearing from Democrats, I still believe it's harsher than the stuff coming from us. I really do. And, when they're attacking Trump the way they do, he's a dictator, and you say these things on TV that he's a dictator and he's not legitimate, eventually that has a negative impact on people. And it may very well be the reason why people do some of these crazy things like shooting Charlie Kirk, a wonderful young man who unfortunately now is dead, and he has a widow and a couple of kids who are going to obviously have a hard time, coping with this, they're going to get a lot of support. They don't have to worry about money or support, but that's never going to replace Charlie, of course, in their lives. Well, on this day in history, another thing too, I want to close with this. Tom Landry was born on this day down in Texas. He was born in South Texas, very close to the Mexican border, down in, I believe the name of the town is Ruidoso, down by McAllen, I think, in that part of the state. Tom Landry, who went to the University of Texas, eventually ended up in World War II flying one of those B-24s that were flown back then, was in a bunch of missions, flying B-24s, eventually came back and ended up as a professional football coach, first, I think, with the Giants. And eventually, he and Vince Lombardi, by the way, were coaches together on the Giants back in the late 50s. And then in the early 60s, when the Dallas Cowboys got their franchise in the NFL, he became the coach of the Cowboys, and he was the coach of the Cowboys for 29 years, from 1960 to 1989. A very successful coach, went to 5 Super Bowls, and was the face of the franchise. As they used to say, the man with the hat and that very elegant suit that he wore during the game. So Tom Landry, we remember him. He was born in 1924, passed away in 2000. One of my all-time favorites. Not only was he a great coach, but he was a great man. Someone who always understood that grace was important, and in anything that you did. And he was always very elegant and very graceful, the great Tom Landry. So happy September 11th. Again, our sympathies to the Charlie Kirk family, and we remember Tom Landry today. Have a great day, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas.